Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Yuna and this is my channel where I talk about books. Today I'm going to be doing a good old wrap up of the books that I read in January. In January I managed to read 14 books. Some of them were absolute bangers, some of them were kind of mid, and some of them I have thoughts on. So I'm going to try to get through it pretty quickly, but I have a feeling that I'm going to be ranting about a couple of these books, so strap in and get ready. We started off strong. The first book that I read in 2026, the first book that I read in January, ended up being one that I really loved, thank God. And that book is A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the second book in the Shadow of the Leviathan, Shadows of the Leviathan, Shadow of the Leviathans. I don't know. We'll say Shadow of the Leviathan series, of which book one was The Tainted Cup, which I read and also enjoyed. These two are technically standalone mysteries that you could read separately, but in order to fully appreciate some of the progression in world building and characters, I think you should read the two of them in order. These books are frequently described as a blending of Sherlock Holmes and Attack on Titan, and I'm not even sure if I would call this a fantasy murder mystery or sci-fi murder mystery, because the fantastical elements in this book are very much rooted in science and biology, but we're gonna say fantasy. I think that still fits. This series takes place in a place called the Empire of Canum, where every year during the wet season, these massive, mysterious creatures emerge from the ocean and ravage the people and the land, and these creatures are called the Leviathans. They're held back by these giant walls that are built up along the coast, very reminiscent of Attack on Titan, but like I said, every year they do sometimes get through. The people in this world will harvest the blood of the Leviathans and use them to genetically alter and augment people. Their blood can give people superpowers such as enhanced senses, superior intellect, and in the case of Din, who is one of the main characters, he has a perfect memory. He can remember anything he's seen or heard, and he can even recite conversations while perfectly copying the accent and inflections of the person who is speaking. Din is the assistant to Anna, who is the other main character in this series, and she's essentially the Sherlock Holmes figure in the story. She's this strange, eclectic, bizarre person who sits in her house and solves mysteries based on the information that Din brings her. And if she does leave her home, she does so blindfolded. She's just a character and she's a mystery. We do actually end up finding out more about her in this book, and I thought that was fascinating. No spoilers, I won't say anything, but I'm really interested to see what they do with the third book and if we get to explore more about Anna's origins and just her person. Like I said, both The Tainted Cup and A Drop of Corruption are murder mysteries, and while I really liked The Tainted Cup, I think I gave it 4 stars. I thought that this book was even better. The dialogue is hilarious and sharp. Anna makes me laugh out loud. She is so funny. The dialogue, especially with Anna present, is so delightful. The pacing is intentional. The mysteries are very intentionally and thoughtfully built up. The clues are integrated in a way that makes sense and feels very organic to the pacing of the story. A Drop of Corruption took the layers of world building that were introduced in A Tainted Cup and just took them and ran. It made it even more expansive, more disturbing, even more curious, and you just realize there's so much about this world that you haven't learned yet, which I love. The prose was already great in The Tainted Cup, but I thought it was even more elevated in A Drop of Corruption. There are parts of the book where Bennett is describing characters or scenarios or places or interactions, and there's just this elegantly disturbing quality. I had to reread passages because I just thought they were so eerie and creepy and curious. So all in all, I thought this was an incredible way to start the year, an incredible way to start my reading month. I believe I gave this 4.5 stars and I might bump it up to 5. I'm debating, but it doesn't matter. Either way, I love this book. I would recommend to anybody who's interested in a dark but funny and disturbing fantasy sci-fi murder mystery. On to the second book that I read in January, which was another one that I really enjoyed, and that is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulet. I'm going to talk about this book more in depth in a video that I believe I'll be posting next week talking about some of my favorite YA books, so I'm going to keep it kind of short. This book follows Danis Fontaine, who is a biracial indigenous teenager. She is part of the Ojibwe community and she ends up getting involved in a government investigation into crime and corruption in her community. While certainly not a perfect book, I thought this was a very important story to be told. I thought it tackled some very relevant and important issues that are facing modern Indigenous communities in the United States. I just think it's a generally well-written thriller sort of mystery novel. But again, I'll go into more detail in an upcoming video. Forgot to say, I gave it a solid 4 stars. We have a special guest. Special guest Lucy, say hi. We're still dealing with the skin issues, so yes, she still has her little jackets on, but she's such a good girl. Okay, now I have a book that I need to spend a minute on because it is one that I personally did not enjoy and I have seen recommended all over the internet. I hope I'm not going to step on any toes, but like I said, people's tastes are different and I obviously want to give my honest opinion on what I'm reading. So the third book I read in January and ended up really disliking was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I feel like I rarely see a recommendation list of dark academia without If We Were Villains and like A Secret History, which is its own separate issue. I picked it up and I really did not like this book. It's going to be hard for me to go into detail on the things that really were bothering me without spoilers, so I'm going to give an overview of the book and some vague spoiler-free thoughts before deep diving into a spoiler section. So this book follows 7 main characters who are Shakespearean theater students at university. They've been friends for years and they've been studying together and performing together. When the book opens, the narrator, who is one of the 7 students, Oliver, is being released from a 10-year prison sentence. He meets up with a detective who worked on his case and essentially put him in jail. And the book is Oliver telling this detective the story of what really happened. I've heard people say that they don't like this book because there was too much Shakespeare, there were too many lengthy Shakespearean quotes or passages incorporated. And that's not at all my complaint. I really liked the immersive theater atmosphere. I thought that even the sort of pretentious and self-important quality of the students and their experience was really immersive and I think made sense for this academic setting. My complaints lie elsewhere. I thought that the way that Rio handled and depicted the one character of color in the main cast was really distasteful. I really didn't like it. I also really didn't like that the way that eating disorders were handled in this story. And I thought that many of the character decisions and motivations or arcs made no sense. I didn't think that they were grounded or believable. It frequently felt like characters did things or took certain actions merely because that was needed to further the plot and not because it really made sense for those characters. This is where the spoiler section starts. Back away if you have not read this book, if you want to read this book, or if you just don't want spoilers in general, because I'm going to be giving big spoilers. As I just said, there is one notable person of color in this book, and that is Alexander. He is a queer mixed Latino student, and I thought that the way that Rio chose to characterize and describe him was distasteful at best. First of all, he was repeatedly described and characterized using animal comparisons and animal characteristics, which she doesn't do, I believe, for any of the other characters. There was one passage where she described him as having long monkey arms, and I was just like, what? She describes him as having long monkey arms and then repeatedly says his smile is canine or talks about his sharp canine teeth. So there's like a lupine sort of quality to him. He is also the one of the 7 students who is the drug addict. He actually ends up overdosing and ends up in the hospital. And there are multiple occasions where he's a very sexual person, and there are multiple occasions where his activities are described in a way that felt uncomfortably predatory to me. So if you take that all together, we have the one person of color in this cast who is part Latino being repeatedly described like an animal. He's a drug addict, very sexual, weirdly predatory. I understand that these characters are supposed to be flawed. They're not perfect people, and that's absolutely fine. But there's just some thought that could have gone into the way that you are portraying your one person of color, and I don't think that it was done well. My second major issue, again, was that many of the character decisions and actions made no sense to me. It just felt like they happened because they had to happen for the story. For example, the main conflict, we have Richard, who is one of the 7 main characters, and at the beginning of the story, he's described as kind of having main character energy. He's very self-centered, very proud. He thinks that he's the best. But he rather abruptly becomes dangerous and abusive and physically assaults his friends and family and even holds one of them underwater, nearly drowning them. Like, he actually becomes physically, emotionally, mentally abusive. And I don't understand how that happened. After Richard's descent into madness and abuse, one day his friends, the 6 other friends in the group, find him injured and incapacitated and drowning in the lake. He's not dead yet, but he's in the water, and they as a group decide, let's not help him, let's leave him, let's let him drown. He is obviously a danger to us, and it's better off if he's dead. One character, James, does put up a bit of a fight and wants to help him, but essentially as a group, they let Richard drown and die. This was another action or decision that I didn't really find fully believable. If you're in a group of friends and you've known each other for years and one of you is suddenly having some sort of mental break, I don't know that that would lead me to be like, all right, well, this person deserves death. And again, I understand that these people are supposed to be flawed, that they're very caught up in their world, they're really immersed in what's happening, and they're really upset with Richard. But I just feel like even if I am afraid of someone, even if I feel wronged by someone, I don't know that the instinct of an entire friend group who's known each other for years would be, let's let this person just freaking die. But I honestly found this more believable than Richard's descent. I think that there's a lot of power in peer pressure and groupthink, and I think that these are, again, very flawed, selfish people who were scared. Another thing about this book that really irked me is that Oliver is repeatedly described as being very kind and very generous and gentle to the point of being naive by multiple characters. And I didn't get that. I thought he was rather bland and also an awful brother to his sisters. There's a point in the book where he goes home to his family and finds out that his sister is struggling with an eating disorder and needs to be checked into inpatient care. He is entirely unsympathetic about this, even dismissive. He, at some point, even, I think, lightly mocks her for her eating disorder. And I just thought that was horrific. And it is a real pet peeve of mine when characters, especially young girls, are giving eating disorders in a book for no real discernible reason other than to just be a plot point. So that really irked me. And finally, the ending of this book broke my brain. I don't know if there's someone out there that can explain to me what I'm missing, because I don't know if I was just sort of emotionally checked out of the book, and so I don't know, I wasn't understanding. Again, big spoilers. We find out that the reason Richard was injured is actually James, who Oliver is romantically interested in. James and Richard got into an altercation, and though James didn't mean to, he ended up striking Richard, and that's how he ends up in the lake. Oliver finds out about this, and he takes the fall for James, and that's why Oliver ends up spending 10 years in prison. Once Oliver gets out of prison, he finds out that James, who was eaten up by the guilt of what he did to Richard and also the fact that Oliver took the fall for him, he actually ended up committing suicide some years ago and has passed away. At the end of the book, however, Oliver finds these Shakespearean hints that suggest that James has faked his death, is still alive, and has left clues on how to reunite so that he and Oliver can be together. What? While that is dramatic and fun and I guess romantic, it makes no sense to me. What would be the point of that? It is so convoluted. Because let me walk through this. If indeed James has faked his own suicide, everyone thinks he's dead. He is dead in the system. People think he has passed away. So even if he does reunite with Oliver, what are they supposed to do? Is he just going to be like, psych, LOL, I'm actually alive, and they're just going to move on with their lives and live together? Are they going to live in hiding? What was the point of putting Oliver through that, making him think that James has died and putting him through that emotional turmoil? And if the end goal of James pretending to commit suicide was that he and Oliver would eventually reunite, why not just not do the fake suicide and just meet Oliver once he's released and they could just be together? Do you know what I mean? I just don't understand what the whole production serves. Why pretend to be dead? It serves no purpose that I can discern. It's left ambiguous if he did actually commit suicide or if he has faked his death. The interpretation that I personally prefer is that James is indeed dead. He did commit suicide, and Oliver sort of reading into these clues and thinking that perhaps James is not dead is a sort of regression into that toxic immersion in that Shakespearean theater setting. I would prefer that, because the other option to me makes no sense and hurts my brain. If I'm missing something obvious that makes sense, please let me know. To be honest though, even if I could get past the weird ending and the character decisions and arcs that felt unbelievable to me. I don't think I can get past the portrayal of Alexander and how the person of color in the story was handled. That was a big ick, left an awful taste in my mouth. So I personally did not enjoy and would not recommend If We Were Villains. Okay, I promise that not all of them are going to be that long. That was the one that I knew that I had to ramble about. The rest of these will be much quicker. The next book I read, thank God, was one that I enjoyed, and that is Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro. Honestly, J.M. Miro and M.L. Rio, I kept mixing up these author names because why are they so similar? Ordinary Monsters is the first in a series. This book is a very vibey, gothic, dark fantasy story that spans from Victorian era London to Scotland to Japan, following a cast of young children with these magical powers and the adults who are trying to find, gather, protect, and sometimes even use the children for their magic. This was a ton of fun, and it was a lot bloodier and violent than I expected for a book where a big chunk of the main cast is made up of very young children. If there was a mood board for this book, it would be full of like foggy mornings, cobblestones, dark lacquered wood, long coats. One of my favorite parts of the story was the antagonist. The antagonist slash villain was a very complicated person with complicated motives and a complicated history, and really tied into the themes of the book, exploring what is a monster, who is a monster, what makes a monster, who are the monsters among us, what does it mean to be human, just so much, along with themes of found family and power and humanity. The book itself isn't necessarily fast-paced. I think there's a lot that happens and it definitely takes its time, but I didn't feel like it dragged at any point. I was always invested and I felt like things were moving along. I ended up loving this book and I gave it 4 stars. I know that the second book is already out and I don't know if there's a release date for the third book. I tend to be someone who prefers to binge read a whole series. I don't like waiting multiple years in between because I'm just going to forget everything that happens, but hopefully I can get to the second book at some point this year. But for now, I recommend this to anybody who is interested in a dark gothic fantasy that's a little gory, a little bloody, and has a beautiful found family. Next is unfortunately another book that I didn't like, and I have stuff to say, but I'm going to try and keep this shorter than If We Were Villains. The book I'm talking about is In the Absence of Men by Philippe Besson. Now, I originally wanted to read Lie With Me, but I still had that book on hold at the library, and this one was available, and it's also short, so I figured I would pick it up. I didn't look into the synopsis at all, and the only thing I really knew was that it was another gay love story. This book made me so uncomfortable. I had my teeth clenched for so much of it and was bracing myself. So the story follows Marcel, who is a 16-year-old French boy during World War I, and his relationship with 2 adult men. One is Arthur, a soldier who is on leave and visiting home from the war. And the second is Marcel, a 45-year-old writer. Now, I might have been able to enjoy this book if it was just about Vincent and Arthur. Even though I found Vincent and Arthur's romance to be a bit dramatic and unbelievable, they essentially have a 1-week, 7-day love affair during which they can't see each other during the day because they have to be secret, and so they get together at night to sleep together and spend time together. Their relationship is very dramatic and depicted to be this world-shattering, life-changing type of love. And did I think that it was grounded and believable? No, but I would have been willing to kind of get swept up in that relationship and invest in that story. But what made it impossible for me to do so was Marcel, the 45-year-old writer. I know that other people have described Marcel and Vincent's relationship as that of a mentor-mentee, but for me, the relationship was so problematic and deeply concerning and made me feel so icky. I love depictions of deep, meaningful, poignant relationships between people of different ages. I think that they can be so beautifully done and just be really impactful, but this was not that. Marcel and Vincent strike up what is described as a friendship, but I'm going to read you quotes from this book and maybe you can understand why I was so uncomfortable. This is Vincent, the 16-year-old, describing Marcel, the 45-year-old man. I perceive your taste for young men and the undeniable delicacy with which you express that taste. You have noticed something in my manner, in my comportment, in the sway of my hips. You know that at 16 I have already bidden farewell to childhood, while still offering an image of childhood. I do not resist my urge to kiss you. I do this astonishing, unseemly thing. I kiss you. I kiss you and I say, so then I think we shall probably be friends, Marcel. Is that not disturbing to anyone that this 45-year-old man is described as having a taste for young boys? Is no one else disturbed by this? Like, this isn't just a innocent friendship between an older man and a teenage boy. This is Marcel describing himself to Vincent, once again, the 16-year-old boy. Vincent, it is important that you should know that I have a faintly, or should I say utterly, dictatorial and possessive concept of friendship. I make many demands. I habitually behave as though my friends were my private property. Vincent, you could never offend me. You are my angel, remember? And then this is describing Marcel's actions. You take my right hand, turn it slowly, look at it for a moment or two. Then you lean forward, bend towards the palm of my hand, and kiss it delicately. I feel your moist lips on my skin, the hairs of your mustache, your asthmatic breath. That's so gross! This middle-aged man is calling this child his angel and kissing his hand and saying this weird stuff about being possessive and property. Another reason Marcel was a big red flag is because he has this weird mommy complex, which, again, I'm going to read to you his own words. This is Marcel speaking. The friendship that I feel for women is that which as an adolescent I felt for the mothers of my friends. Do you wish me to say I prefer women who are older than I? It is perfectly true. I will confess that I find their motherly charms suit me. I love the mother within the woman. That is to say, I like to feel like a son. I think you get the point. Marcel and his relationship with Vincent just gave me such icky vibes that I couldn't enjoy anything about the book. And by the time it got to the end, there's this big reveal or twist that happens at the end, and I didn't even care. I didn't even take the time to really think about it or digest it because I just wanted out of there. If I had to share some positives, the writing style itself was really lovely. It was lyrical and introspective and sort of pretentious in that grand way that isn't necessarily off-putting. But again, I couldn't enjoy any of that because Marcel made me feel so icky and had my skin crawling. So I'm really hoping that I enjoyed Lie With Me more than this because this was a hard no. I think I gave it 2 stars, maybe 1.5 stars. It doesn't matter. I just did not like this book. I feel like I'm doing a compliment sandwich or something because the next book is one that I loved. I actually think this is my favorite book of the month, and that is none other than The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This was such a unique and singular reading experience. In the story, we follow 2 young men, June and Kima, who are aiding this captive moon goddess as she tries to escape captivity and escape her 3 sons who are called the Three Terrors. This book has an incredibly unconventional narrative structure. It switches between first and second and third person point of view with different characters, sometimes on the same page with no demarcation or any sort of signal that things have changed. I actually couldn't do the audiobook for the first bit until I got used to the narrative structure and understood what was happening. I had to see it with my eyes for it to make sense at first. The story is layered, or actually it might be more appropriate to say that it's nested. There's sort of a story nested within a story within a story. It is definitely confusing at first, but if you think of it sort of as a stage play or oral storytelling, it might help you understand what's going on more. But if you are feeling disoriented at first, please don't give up. Keep going, because once you sort of lock in and understand what's happening, it gets so good. The writing style itself is so lovely. It's really descriptive and indulgent and sensory and poetic. And I underlined or tabbed so much of this book just for the beautiful passages alone. The magic in the world again feels so lush. It's almost like dropping into a fable or a fairy tale. I really liked the first half of this book, but the second half of this book I loved. And I think the last 25% was what really made this whole thing shine for me. It is worth it to get through any of the confusion that you might have at the beginning, because woo, that ending, it made me emotional. I definitely cried multiple times in the last 50 pages of this book. Because of how not traditional the structure of this book is, it might not be for everyone, but I would still recommend it if you want beautiful lyrical writing, a epic fantasy story, you want some queer elements. Please pick this up, give it a shot, I beg you. It was so beautiful. Oh my god, I'm losing steam. All right, I'm gonna try and get through the next ones quickly because my voice is leaving. I'm gonna talk about the next 3 books together because they're actually short stories or very short novellas that are all part of the same collection. I have Arc, You Have Arrived, and Randomized. Like I mentioned, these are all part of a collection of sci-fi stories by different authors. And to be honest, I was only really interested in this series because N.K. Jemisin has a story, Emergency Skin, in there, and she is one of my favorite authors. But I figured since that they're so short, I think most of them were about an hour on audiobook, I was like, why not? I'll just get through all of them. I will say that these three were incredibly mid. They were fine. They were forgettable. I don't think I'll ever think about them again, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend them. I think I gave Arc and You Have Arrived 3 stars. My least favorite was Randomized by Andy Weir. Andy Weir? I don't know how to say his name. The guy who wrote Project Hail Mary. I didn't like that one. Yeah, I'm not going to go into them individually. If you're interested, it's a really short collection, but none of these stood out to me. Next, I read Such Small Hands. I don't have it in person anymore because I returned it to the library after reading it. This book was a eerie, disturbing tale that looks into the cruelty of children and the very complicated minds of young children. The book follows Marina, who is a little girl who ends up in an orphanage after her parents pass away in a tragic car accident. Through alternating point of views, we see Marina's perspective and also the perspective of the other children at the orphanage, and we explore sort of their fascination with her and their resentment of her, and it all builds to this climactic event. The book, if I'm not mistaken, was inspired by true life events at an orphanage where the caretakers found the children playing with the body parts of one of the children, if that gives you an idea of the vibe of the story. This was an interesting book in that I thought it was well written, but it just didn't hit with me. I don't think it was a fault of the book. I can absolutely see why other people would really enjoy and be moved by the story, but it just wasn't for me. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. Next was a beautiful nonfiction read that was Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin is the author of one of my favorite books of all time, Braiding Sweetgrass. Much like Braiding Sweetgrass, this was a combination of science and botany with indigenous traditions and indigenous knowledge, but where Braiding Sweetgrass was pretty broad in scope. It touched on many aspects of natural life. In Gathering Moss, as you can imagine, it was very much a deep dive on moss and this very specific plant. I thought this was a beautiful and genuine expression of love for this often overlooked aspect of nature, while also incorporating, again, human relationships with the natural world and what our relationships could look like if we were more mindful. I think if you enjoyed Braiding Sweetgrass but are interested in doing a bit more of a deep dive on this particular plant and going more into sort of the science behind it, you might really like this. Again, it was a much narrower focus than Braiding Sweetgrass, but I thought it was really lovely and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read another nonfiction, this time a memoir, and that was North to Paradise by Osman Umar. This is a very short but powerful memoir following Osman's 5-year journey from his little village in Ghana all the way to seeking asylum in Barcelona. The writing style is incredibly straightforward and matter of fact. There is no lyricism, there is no decoration to the writing style that's trying to elicit an emotion. It really is the story, the facts of his journey that is going to make the impact. He shares both the shocking cruelty and the life-saving kindness that he encounters on his journey. And I think it's just a very humanizing read, and it reminds you that migrants, asylum seekers, believe it or not, are just people. They're people just like you and me, and they have endured incredible hardships to try to find a life for themselves. So I think if you have time, it's so short, it's a very easy read. If you're interested in a quick memoir, absolutely pick it up. I always feel weird rating memoirs, but I did give this 5 stars. We are nearing the end with my second to last book that I read in January, and that was The Pachinko Parlor by Lisa Shua Dusapin. I don't know how to pronounce her name, so sorry, but I'll just say Elisa. I think this is a really special novella that probably won't hit for everybody. The main character is Claire, a French-Korean woman who is visiting her grandparents who run a pachinko parlor in Japan. She plans to stay with them for a bit and then wants all 3 of them to visit Korea. While she is in Japan, she tutors a young Japanese girl in French and ends up developing a bond with her. This is a quiet, subtle, measured, introspective novella where all of the emotional impact is sort of hidden and simmering underneath a deliberately stripped down writing style. It's a story where a lot is up to the reader to sit down and to think about what is happening. Nothing is over explained. The scenes are laid out before you, but you have to sort of parse through the implications and the subtleties to understand the emotional heart behind the story. I found the grandparents and Claire's relationship with them to be so heartbreaking. the way that despite being family, things like time and distance and language barriers make it so that they can't quite connect the way that they want to. I just thought that the way that the grandparents tried to express their love for Claire and the way that they talked about their disconnect from motherland, all of that just got me right in the gut. Spoilers, there's a scene at the very end. Like I said, the grandparents and Claire were meant to visit Korea together, but at the very last minute, the grandparents decide, actually, we're not going to go because they've spent so much time in Japan that at this point, it's Korea that feels foreign. It's Korea that feels sort of unknowable to them. It really mirrored conversations I've had with my own parents about our experience living in diaspora, living away from motherland, and what it's like to go back and feel like we're strangers in our own land. It really hit for me and it really resonated with me. I don't know that it will be for everyone or that everyone will take away as much as I did, but I gave this 4 stars. I really, really liked it. We've made it to my final book of January, Some Are Always Hungry by Cheon Yoon. This is a poetry collection by the author of one of my favorite YA books. I'm actually going to talk about that book in the same book in which I'll elaborate on Firekeeper's Daughter. But I read her YA novel and I remember thinking she is such a beautiful writer. I wonder if she wrote poetry, and lo and behold, she had this book published, so I had to pick it up. This, much like the Pachinko Parlor, is one that I thought was so beautiful and impactful and resonated with me for the elements of like the Korean American experience. I don't know that it'll hit for everyone the same, but it is still a beautiful collection of poems. In this collection, Cheon uses food and cooking and eating as an anchor through which to explore themes like immigration, wartime trauma, assimilation, identity. There's a special focus on the experience of women and women's bodies. I think so much of this will be really recognizable and hit hard for my fellow Koreans, so I recommend it. The poetry is meticulous and dark and lyrical and incisive without being too difficult to understand. I know that poetry can sometimes feel a bit dense or opaque, but I don't think that was the case for this book. We also just have to take a minute for how beautiful the cover is, because what is that? That is so stunning. Incredible. So anyway, I wrapped up my reading month with this beautiful collection of poetry, which I gave a hearty 4 stars. Not a moment too soon, because I can literally feel my voice leaving me, but we have made it through the 14 books that I read in January, and I'm realizing it was a great month for short books because I have these, and then the 4 that I don't have physically are also either short stories or novellas, so love that for me. I've already started on my February TBR, which I shared in a previous video, and I think it's going to be an excellent reading month. But let me know in the comments what your favorite book and or least favorite book that you read in February was, or let me know if you've read any of these books, especially if you have a differing opinion than I do. But thank you again for watching. Happy reading, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.